Turn around and put your hands on the hood.
For what? You still haven't told me why I was stopped?
Do what I said.
I'm asking for the legal reason.
You're acting suspicious.
What happens when a local patrol officer stops a driver, sees federal credentials, and still decides to push forward like none of that matters? One roadside detention turned into a legal mess. The second that officer ignored what was in front of him. Was he being careful, or was he trying to force control after the stop stopped making sense? That question followed the case from the shoulder of the road all the way into federal court. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about Bodycam evidence, bad stops, and real consequences when officers cross the line, like the video and subscribe. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was an undercover FBI asset working around a sensitive federal investigation in Metro Atlanta. On that evening, he was heading home after a long day downtown. He wasn't speeding, he wasn't weaving, he wasn't doing anything that stood out. He drove the way a lot of trained law enforcement people drive when they know any stop can become a problem. Slow, clean, careful. Around 7:45 p.m., he saw patrol lights in his mirror, signaled, and pulled over near a gas station where the area was lit and visible. The patrol officer was Aaron Boone, 5 years on the job, already carrying himself like every simple stop was a test of authority. He walked up with his hand close to his weapon and asked for license and registration. Mercer answered the right way. He told Boone he was going to reach for the paperwork, then did it slowly. The registration came first, then the wallet. Inside the wallet were his driver's license and federal credentials. Boone saw them. That should have settled the stop. It didn't. Boone's tone got sharper, not calmer. He ordered Mercer out of the SUV. Mercer asked why he had been stopped. Boone didn't answer the question. He repeated the order, louder. That was the first sign the stop had stopped being professional. When an officer has a real reason, he usually says it. When he doesn't, he leans on pressure. A second unit arrived before Boone had even explained the stop. The backup officer moved to the passenger side and started scanning the inside of the vehicle. Mercer stepped out. He stayed calm. Dress shirt, slacks, work shoes. No aggressive posture. No argument for the sake of argument. He kept asking the same basic thing. What was the legal reason for the stop? Boone kept moving past that like it didn't matter. Boone put Mercer against the hood and patted him down harder than needed. Then the backup officer began searching the SUV. Mercer said clearly that he did not consent. They searched anyway. Console, glove box, under the seats. They were no longer checking something specific. They were looking for anything that could justify what Boone had already done. They found nothing. Boone then asked if there were weapons in the vehicle. Mercer answered directly. Yes, he was federally authorized to carry, and the weapon was secured in a locked compartment between the front seats. Boone removed it. By then, people at the gas station had started paying attention. A couple of them pulled out their phones. That changed the stop immediately. Boone was still in control of the scene, but now he was also being watched. Mercer still didn't give him anything useful. No yelling, no sudden movement, no resistance. That made Boone look worse every minute the stop continued. Officers like Boone expect panic or pushback because it gives them something to write down later. Mercer gave him neither. Then Boone ordered him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Mercer asked what he was being detained for. Boone said suspicious activity. That was the explanation. A man driving lawfully, pulling over correctly, and showing valid federal identification was now being called suspicious. Boone cuffed him and put him in the back of the patrol car. Mercer asked for a supervisor. He asked more than once. He also asked Cest to make a phone call. Boone ignored both requests while he and the other officer kept searching the SUV. This is where the stop turned from bad judgment into ego. Boone already had enough information to slow down and verify. He chose not to. He had seen the credentials. He had heard the explanation. He knew Mercer wasn't some random guy inventing a story on the shoulder. But once Boone had committed to the detention, backing off would mean admitting he was wrong. So he doubled down. At one point, the officers found Mercer's work laptop and started to open it. Mercer told them it contained sensitive federal case material, and they had no authority to access it. That made them pause. For the first time, Boone looked like he understood he might be stepping into a situation bigger than he could control. About 45 minutes into the detention, a supervisor arrived. Her name was Sergeant Lena Ortiz. She spoke to Boone first. Boone told her he had made the stop because of a broken taillight. Ortiz checked the vehicle. The taillights were working. Boone then switched to a different reason. He said the SUV matched a vehicle tied to a robbery report from weeks earlier in another part of the city. Same stop. New story. That's where the whole thing started falling apart. Boone also told Ortiz that Mercer had been aggressive and uncooperative. That claim had a problem. The body cam was running. Witnesses had been recording too. Mercer had stayed controlled the entire time. No threats, no resistance, no scene. Boone was now locked into a version of events that the footage could test. Ortiz went to the patrol car, got Mercer's wallet, and looked at the credentials herself. Then she made a phone call to verify them. That should have happened much earlier, before the cuffs, before the search, before the stop dragged out in front of a growing crowd. After that call, the tone changed fast. Ortiz opened the patrol car door and told Mercer he was being released. The cuffs came off. Mercer stepped out and looked at the inside of his SUV. Papers were scattered, his work bag had been emptied, his things had been moved around during the search. He asked the questions Boone had avoided from the start. What was the reason for the stop? What justified the detention? What justified the search? Ortiz gave the standard answer departments use when they know the facts are bad. She called it a misunderstanding. Mercer knew better. This was not confusion. Boone had seen federal credentials and kept going. He had ordered a detention, backed a search, ignored repeated requests for a supervisor, and changed the reason for the stop once a supervisor arrived. That was the roadside record so far. And Mercer understood something Boone didn't yet. The stop was over. The evidence part was just starting. Daniel Mercer didn't drive away and let it go. That was Boone's first real mistake after the stop itself. He assumed release would close the problem. It did the opposite. Mercer stood there for another minute and did what experienced people do when they know a case is already building. He took photos of the SUV. He photographed the inside, the papers out of place, the compartments that had been opened, the work bag that had been emptied. Then he photographed his wrists. The cuffs had left clear red marks. He also got contact information from the people who had recorded the stop. Some of them sent him their video files that same night. Boone had spent nearly an hour trying to control the scene. Now the scene was leaving with half a dozen witnesses. The next morning, Mercer went straight to his federal supervisor. He didn't come in emotional. He came in organized. Timeline first, stop location, approximate time, names and badge numbers, search, detention, firearm removal, refusal to explain the stop, refusal to call a supervisor until much later, shifting reasons once a sergeant arrived, then the videos, then the photos, then the marks from the cuffs. When a case is bad, people usually feel it. When a case is dangerous, people can document it. Mercer had both. The FBI treated it seriously from the start. They had to. This wasn't just a rough traffic stop. A local patrol officer had detained an undercover federal asset after seeing federal credentials, searched the vehicle anyway, handled a federally authorized weapon, and came close to accessing sensitive work material. That gets attention fast. Mercer also contacted a civil rights attorney. Her name was Rachel Kim. She reviewed the stop, the body cam issue, the witness footage, and the timing. Her reaction was simple. This had gone far enough to justify immediate federal action if the department started stonewalling or retaliating. That same day, the videos started moving. One clip showed Boone ordering Mercer out after looking at the credentials. Another showed Mercer staying calm while Boone kept escalating. Another showed the release after the supervisor's call. The clip spread across TikTok, Instagram, and X before the department had its story straight. That mattered because once the public sees the scene before the agency writes the report, the usual cleanup gets harder. People were already asking the obvious questions. Why detain him after seeing the credentials? Why search the vehicle? Why did the reason for the stop change? Why did it take a supervisor's phone call to do what should have happened at minute 5? By the afternoon, local media had picked it up. Then bigger outlets followed. Mercer's name wasn't pushed into the story the way a normal victim's would be because of the federal angle and the sensitivity around his work, but the facts were bad enough on their own. A driver with federal identification had been cuffed, searched, and held while the officer's explanation shifted on camera. The department put out the usual statement. They said they were aware of the incident. They said they were reviewing it. They said they took allegations seriously. That language always shows up when an agency wants time more than truth. Rachel Kim didn't wait around for the department to get comfortable. She moved before they could settle into delay mode. Her first step was evidence preservation. She sent formal notice demanding that the department preserve Bodycam footage, dashcam footage, dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS records, internal messages, search records, and every report tied to the stop. That's how serious lawyers work these cases. They don't start with outrage. They start by cutting off the escape routes. No missing video, no edited timeline, no claim later that something was automatically deleted. Then she started building the federal complaint. Not vague language, specific claims, unlawful detention, unreasonable search, retaliatory escalation after presentation of federal credentials, interference with a federally connected operation, potential exposure of sensitive material, failure to timely verify identity after being given the means to do it. She also focused on Boone's changing explanations because that's the kind of thing judges notice immediately. A stop with one clear basis is one thing. A stop with one reason, then another. Then a claim of aggression contradicted by video looks like post hoc justification. And courts don't like that game. The department could feel the pressure building inside the building before any injunction landed. Internal Affairs opened its review. Boone was told to prepare a statement. That's usually where officers try to line up the language. Mercer was evasive. Mercer was aggressive. Mercer created officer safety concerns. The problem this time was that the footage existed outside the department too. Witnesses had angles the body cam didn't. Once that happens, the report can't just be written for the file. It has to survive comparison. Boone was boxed in by his own choices. The sergeant, Lena Ortiz, now had a problem of her own. She hadn't started the stop, but she had arrived in the middle of it and inherited the mess. Her phone call had ended the detention, which helped Mercer, but it also showed something ugly about the department. Verification had always been available. Boone just didn't want to slow down enough to use it. That issue started climbing the chain fast. Command staff didn't just have a patrol problem anymore. They had a supervision problem. They had a training problem. And because the detainee was tied to federal work, they now had a federal court problem too. Kim filed for emergency relief before the department could settle into a defensive pattern. That was the turning point in the legal side. She argued that the court needed to step in quickly, because this was not just about damages later. It was about immediate protection of evidence, protection against retaliation, and protection against further interference with Mercer or material connected to his federal work. She asked for orders preventing destruction of records, restricting direct contact or retaliation by involved personnel, and forcing the department to preserve and identify all evidence tied to the stop. That filing changed the whole atmosphere. A lawsuit is one thing, emergency federal court attention is another. Agencies can drag their feet on complaints. They get very alert when a judge starts asking questions. Boone probably still thought this was about whether the stop looked bad. He was behind. The issue had already moved past optics. Now it was about whether his actions had crossed into a constitutional violation with federal consequences attached. Once that happens, The badge doesn't protect the officer the way he thought it would. The department's legal team had to respond fast. They reviewed the footage. They reviewed dispatch. They reviewed the stop report. That's when the mismatch became impossible to ignore. Boone's first reason didn't hold. The second reason looked weak. The aggression claim didn't fit the video. Mercer's requests for a supervisor were there. His refusal to consent to the search was there too. This wasn't a close case. That's the problem with body cams when the officer forgets they're not just for his side. They record the parts he wishes were never said. Inside the department, people started reacting the way they always do when they realize federal court may get there before internal review does. Some wanted Boone cut loose immediately. Some wanted to call it a bad stop and contain it. Some were more worried about the federal relationship than the stop itself. That happens a lot too. Departments can ignore regular people for years and suddenly become very respectful when another badge is involved. It's ugly, but it's real. Mercer didn't care about their panic. He cared about the record. He and Kim kept tightening the case. Witness videos were logged. Photos were dated. Names were confirmed. Public statements from the department were compared against what the footage actually showed. Every hour that passed made it harder for the agency to pretend the stop had just gotten messy by accident. Boone had seen the credentials. He had time to verify. He kept pushing. That was the core fact, and it kept surviving every review. Then word came back that the federal court was taking the emergency request seriously. The federal court didn't wait long. That's what really shook the department. Not the social media clips, not the news coverage, not the angry calls. The court moved. Once Rachel Kim's emergency filing landed with the videos, the photos, the report issues, and the federal connection, the department lost the luxury of dragging this out internally. A judge ordered immediate preservation of all evidence tied to the stop and put restrictions in place to prevent interference or retaliation while the case moved forward. That injunction changed everything inside the building. It told command staff this was no longer a public relations issue. It was now a federal court matter with direct oversight. The department reacted the only way it could. Fast. Aaron Boone was pulled from patrol almost immediately. His weapon and department vehicle were taken pending review. He was placed on administrative status, while internal affairs and department lawyers tried to get in front of the collapse. The backup officer was also removed from regular field duty, while his role in the search was reviewed. Sergeant Lena Ortiz stayed on paper, but her handling of the stop, especially the delay before intervention, was folded into a supervisory review. The department didn't call it a shakeup in public at first. That's exactly what it was. Schedules changed. Assignments changed. Command meetings stacked up. People who had ignored warning signs before were suddenly forced to explain what training had actually been given and what discipline had not been used. That federal injunction also forced another ugly question into the open. What if Mercer hadn't been tied to federal work? What if he had just been another driver with no leverage, no federal chain behind him, no attorney moving this fast, and no witnesses willing to preserve the footage? That question hung over the whole case because everyone knew the answer. The stop might have been buried as a routine detention. Boone might have written the report his way and walked it through review like nothing serious had happened. The video stopped that. The court stopped that. Mercer's discipline stopped that. But the real problem was that the department had systems that still allowed officers to think they could get away with this in the first place. Internal affairs started going through Boone's record. That part mattered more than the department wanted to admit. Once an officer is caught in a high-profile stop like this, investigators stop looking only at the one incident. They start asking whether this was the first time or just the first time the footage got too strong to ignore. Boone's prior complaints came back into focus. So did his use of force history. So did prior allegations involving black male drivers. Those complaints had not led to serious consequences before. Now they were being read in a different light, not as isolated friction, as warning signs the department had chosen to live with. That's how departments create their own scandals, not only through one officer's ego. Through years of low-grade tolerance, the legal pressure kept building. Kim didn't let the injunction become symbolic. She used it as leverage. Every preserved record mattered now. Dispatch logs, body cam timing, supervisor contact delay, search sequence, stop report language. Once the paperwork was compared against the footage, Boone's position got worse. His claimed reasons for the stop didn't line up cleanly. His description of Mercer's behavior looked weaker every time the videos were replayed. The department's lawyers understood the danger right away. If this went deeper into the discovery, the case would not stay limited to Boone's decisions on one roadside shoulder. It could spread into training failures, complaint handling, and command knowledge. That's the kind of case city attorneys hate, because it turns one ugly event into a map of the whole system. Mercer stayed quiet in public. Smart move. He let the evidence do the talking. That usually lands harder than speeches. He had already done the important part. He had stayed calm during the stop. He had documented the damage right after. He had moved fast the next morning. He had not given Boone any noise to hide behind. So when the department started trying to soften its language, the record kept beating them back. The department finally made a stronger public move once it became clear the federal court was not going to let this drift. Boone was suspended pending final disposition. The backup officer was reassigned. A command-level review was announced into traffic stop practices, search authority, identity verification procedures, and handling of interactions involving outside agencies or federal personnel. That sounds technical. It was really an admission that the department had a patrol culture problem and had been forced to face it all at once. Then came the part that really stung. Outside review. Once a department loses trust in its own process, or looks like it has, outside oversight starts getting more support. City officials wanted distance. Federal officials wanted reliability. Community leaders wanted proof that this wasn't going to be handled with one quiet suspension and a memo nobody read. The department had to open itself up more than it wanted. That meant more scrutiny on training files, more scrutiny on complaint histories, and more scrutiny on how officers were taught to respond when a stop stops making sense. Boone's detention of Mercer had forced the agency into a position it never wanted to be in, explaining its habits under pressure instead of hiding them inside policy language. For Boone, the career damage was already done. Even before the final outcome, he had become the face of a case no department wants attached to its patch. A patrol officer sees federal credentials and escalates anyway. He searches anyway. He cuffs anyway. Then he changes the reason for the stop once a supervisor shows up. That combination is poison in court and poison inside a command staff meeting. Officers can survive mistakes. They usually don't survive footage that makes the mistake look stubborn. Boone hadn't just made a bad call. He had kept making worse ones after he had chances to stop. That's what ended him. Mercer's side got what mattered most first: protection of the record, protection against quiet retaliation, immediate court attention. After that came the broader consequences. Policy changes were pushed. Verification procedures were tightened. Supervisors were told to respond faster in disputed stops involving claimed official credentials. Training blocks were revised around search limits, detention thresholds, and roadside escalation. Departments love acting like reform takes years. Funny how quickly changes appear when a federal judge is watching. And Mercer, he got something more important than a speech from the chief or some carefully worded apology. He got the truth locked into the record before the department could smother it. That matters a lot, because dignity means very little if the paperwork says the officer was right and the video disappears. Mercer made sure that didn't happen. That's the lesson in this case. Boone thought authority would carry him through the stop. Mercer understood something bigger. Calm matters. Documentation matters. Oversight matters. And once an officer starts making decisions to protect his pride instead of the law, the badge stops helping him and starts becoming evidence against him. What would you have done in Mercer's position? And do you think departments act faster only when the person they target has power behind him? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
Hands up, don't move.
My hands are up. I'm federal law enforcement.
Get on the ground.
Federal air marshal on active duty. You need to verify that through the proper channel.
On the ground, now.
What happens when a county deputy puts an undercover federal officer in handcuffs inside a crowded airport terminal because of a false report? One bad call had already turned a boarding gate into a security scene, and the deputy still did not understand that the man on the floor was a federal air marshal on active duty. Was this careful response work, or a deputy forcing the wrong call all the way through? That is why this confrontation blew up the moment the footage spread. Tell me where you're watching from. If you follow stories about body cam mistakes, bad detentions, and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. This case shows how fast one bad decision can turn into a federal problem. Deputy Mason Kerr got the alert while working airport support in Terminal B. Dispatch told him a man near Gate 22 had a firearm and was acting suspiciously. That kind of call changes everything in an airport. Kerr moved through the concourse fast, past a row of passengers waiting near the boarding lane, and found the man standing near the seating area with a carry-on beside him. The man was Julian Cross, a federal air marshal. Cross was dressed like any ordinary traveler because that was how the job worked. He was there to blend in, board the flight, and stay unnoticed unless something went wrong. He was not supposed to be identified in front of passengers. He was not supposed to be the center of a public confrontation. The second Kerr stepped in and started giving loud commands, that assignment was already in trouble. Kerr did not start with questions. He drew his weapon, ordered Cross to raise his hands, and told him not to move. People near the gate stopped what they were doing. Some backed away. Others turned toward the scene. A few took out their phones and started recording right away. Cross kept his hands visible and stayed still. He identified himself as federal law enforcement and said he was a federal air marshal on active duty. He said he had credentials and told Kerr to verify through the proper channel. Kerr kept his weapon up. That was the point where the stop stopped being controlled and started becoming a problem. No one would fault a deputy for taking an armed person call seriously in an airport. The problem was what happened after Cross identified himself. Kerr acted as if the statement meant nothing. He ordered Cross to the ground. Cross repeated that he was authorized to carry, that he had credentials, and that the deputy needed to verify before making the scene worse. Kerr kept pushing commands instead of slowing the encounter down. Cross got on the ground because he understood where this was heading. He did not argue in circles. He did not make sudden movements. He kept speaking in a clear voice and repeated the same basic facts. He was a federal air marshal. He was armed legally. This had to be verified through the right contact. Kerr cuffed him anyway. That changed the whole scene in seconds. Now, passengers were watching a man get handcuffed after he had already identified himself as federal law enforcement. Boarding slowed down. Airline staff looked over from the desk. A parent moved a child farther back from the gate lane. The people standing there did not know whether they were watching a real threat get stopped or a deputy making a huge mistake. Cross told Kerr the detention was compromising a federal assignment. He told him again to verify through airport command and federal channels. Kerr answered like a man who had already locked himself into the first version of events. He said credentials had to be confirmed. That sounds fine until you look at what he had already done. He had gone to a drawn weapon, forced Cross to the floor, and put him in cuffs in public before handling the one verification step that should have come first after the federal identification. Kerr searched Cross and found federal credentials. That should have ended it. It did not. Kerr looked at the credentials and said they could be fake. He told Cross to stay quiet. He told nearby travelers to back up. Then he got on the radio and said he had an armed subject, claiming to be a federal agent. That wording made everything worse. Another deputy arrived. An airport operations supervisor came over because boarding had slowed and people were asking questions. A Transportation Security Administration duty manager was pulled in because the gate area was starting to look like an active security event. Kerr gave the same explanation each time. Armed man, suspicious behavior, claims federal status, credentials not confirmed. The issue was not that he wanted confirmation. The issue was that he had already made the detention public before doing the check that mattered most. Cross was still on the floor in cuffs. His face was visible to half the gate area. Anyone boarding that flight now had a reason to remember him. For an undercover federal air marshal, that is not a minor problem. That can destroy the whole purpose of the assignment. This is where these body cam cases become easy to read. An officer trying to solve the problem acts one way. An officer trying to defend his own earlier decision acts another way. Kerr looked like he was doing the second one. The airport supervisor asked whether the man had provided identification. Kerr said yes, but it had not been verified. Cross repeated the same statement he had made from the start. He identified his agency, said he was on active duty, and asked for a supervisor and federal confirmation. He stayed calm. He did not resist. He did not behave like a threat. Kerr still treated him like one. More travelers stopped to watch. More phones went up. People started guessing. Some thought Cross was an armed suspect. Some thought he was pretending to be law enforcement. Others were starting to realize the deputy might be in the wrong. That is how public confusion spreads in real time. People do not need full facts. They just need a scene big enough to start filling in the blanks themselves. Then Sergeant Leah Barton arrived. She moved in, got Kerr's summary, and heard the same version he had already told everyone else. Armed man near the gate. Suspicious conduct. Claimed to be a federal air marshal. Credentials not verified. Then she addressed Cross directly. He identified himself again, said he was on duty, and told her to contact federal dispatch immediately. Barton understood the problem right away. A false report inside an airport is serious. A county deputy publicly detaining an undercover federal air marshal is worse. At that point, she knew the next few minutes would decide whether this stayed a bad stop or turned into a full interagency disaster. That was how it started. One false report, one deputy who escalated before verifying, one federal officer exposed in front of a terminal full of travelers, and the scene was still building. Sergeant Leah Barton knew right away that she was not looking at a normal airport detention. She had a county deputy holding an armed man in cuffs near a boarding gate. That man was calm, specific, and consistent. He said he was a federal air marshal. He said he was on active duty. He said the deputy needed to verify through federal channels immediately. None of that matched the usual behavior of someone bluffing through a bad stop. Barton told Deputy Mason Kerr to step back and stop talking over him. Then she asked Julian Cross to identify himself again. Cross did. Same answer. Same tone. Federal air marshal. Active assignment. Armed by authority. Immediate verification required. He did not try to make a speech. He did not over-explain. He gave her the exact information she needed and nothing extra. That mattered. People who are lying usually start adding things. Cross did not. Barton took the credentials from Kerr and looked at them herself. They appeared legitimate. Federal seal, proper formatting, agency identification. That did not end the problem because appearance alone was not enough. But it changed the issue. Now the question was no longer whether Cross had identified himself. He had. The question was why Kerr had kept escalating after that point. Barton asked Kerr exactly what Cross had done before the detention. Kerr said dispatch reported an armed, suspicious man near the gate and that Cross matched the description. Barton asked whether Cross had threatened anyone. Kerr said no. She asked whether he had displayed the firearm. Kerr said no. She asked whether he had refused commands. Kerr tried to frame it as non-compliance, but the body cam was already telling a cleaner story than he was. Cross had identified himself, kept his hands visible, and asked for verification. That was not the same as resistance. This was where the stop started falling apart. A Transportation Security Administration duty manager came back over and asked whether the gate needed to be cleared. An airline supervisor wanted to know if the flight had to be delayed. Passengers were still filming from the seating area. A few had moved farther away, but most stayed because people always stay when something public and confusing is happening. Barton now had two problems at once. She had to contain the crowd, and she had to figure out whether her deputy had just exposed an undercover federal officer in front of a live departure. She ordered one deputy to move the bystanders back and told airport staff to pause boarding until she gave an answer. Then she got on the radio herself. That was the moment the verification fight really started. Airport Command did not have immediate confirmation. That was not unusual. These assignments are not broadcast openly to every local unit in a terminal. Barton then tried to reach the federal contact line through the airport law enforcement desk. That took time. More time than it should have. More time than Kerr's decision had left them. Cross was still in cuffs while all of this played out. He told Barton that every extra minute made the damage worse. He was right. His face was already known to the passengers around that gate. Anyone on that flight with bad intentions had now seen law enforcement publicly identify him as someone special enough to detain hard and argue over. Even if nobody around the gate understood exactly what he was, they knew he was not just a random traveler anymore. That alone was a security failure. Kerr still wanted to defend the stop. He told Barton he could not just trust a badge and a claim in an airport. That line sounds strong until you compare it to what actually happened. Nobody was asking him to trust blindly. Cross had asked him to verify. Barton was now doing exactly that. The issue was that Kerr had chosen force first and procedure second. And this is where some officers get themselves buried. They think if the first move was aggressive enough, they have to keep justifying it to avoid looking weak. That never works once supervisors and cameras catch up. Barton asked Kerr when he first saw the credentials. He hesitated. That told her enough before he even answered. He admitted he had found them during the search after putting Cross on the ground and cuffing him. Barton asked why he did not pause the detention right there and call for confirmation before continuing the public hold. Kerr said the credentials could have been fake. Barton asked what training factor, specific behavior, or visible inconsistency made him think they were fake. He did not have much. He went back to the dispatch call. Suspicious man, armed subject, airport setting. That was not a full answer. That was a loop. Cross cut in and made the point directly. He said the deputy had already made up his mind before the verification ever started. He was right again. Barton did not argue with him. She kept working the radio. Then Airport Command finally reached the right federal contact chain. Not directly, indirectly, through a secure routing process that should have happened earlier and privately, not in the middle of a packed gate area with a man in cuffs and half the terminal filming. The wait was brutal because nobody at the scene could speed it up. That is the ugly part of these moments. Once an officer creates the wrong kind of urgency, everyone else has to fix it using systems that do not move at panic speed. Passengers kept reacting in real time. One woman near the charging station said out loud that the man had told them he was law enforcement from the start. Another passenger said the deputy probably had to assume the worst. A third said this should never be happening in public if the man was federal. All of them were partly right. That is why the scene was so bad. Every side of it looked wrong at once. Kerr then made the mistake that really exposed what was driving him. He said within earshot of the crowd that people pretend to be agents all the time and that he was not going to get played in his own terminal. That line landed badly. First, it was not his terminal. He was support personnel in a shared airport environment with local, airport, federal, and aviation authority interests overlapping in the same space. Second, that statement made the stop sound personal. It did not sound like careful procedure. It sounded like pride. Cross answered in a flat voice. He said this was never about Kerr being careful. It was about Kerr refusing to slow down once federal credentials appeared. That was the mask-off moment. From there, the whole thing changed. Barton knew it. The Transportation Security Administration manager knew it. Even the other deputies knew it. This was no longer a deputy holding the line during a tense airport call. This was a deputy who had taken a false report, ignored a federal identification, exposed an undercover air marshal, and then kept arguing because he did not want to reverse himself in front of civilians. Then the confirmation came in. Federal dispatch confirmed that Julian Cross was an active federal air marshal assigned to duty travel connected to that gate area. That ended the factual dispute completely. Barton told Kerr to remove the handcuffs. He did, but slowly and without saying much. Cross stood up, adjusted his jacket, and looked exactly like what he had been from the beginning, a trained federal officer who had just been publicly mishandled by a local deputy who did not know when to stop. Nobody around the gate missed that shift. A few passengers lowered their phones. Others kept recording because the release is often the most revealing part. That is when you see whether the officer apologizes, whether the supervisor takes control, whether anyone acts like the damage matters. Kerr did not apologize. He started to explain himself instead. He said he had to respond to the information he was given. Cross cut him off and said the response was not the issue. The failure was what happened after the identification. That was clean. Accurate, too. Barton told airport staff to keep the area clear and asked the Transportation Security Administration manager to coordinate with the airline on what came next for the flight. Cross then made the point nobody wanted to hear. His cover was gone. Everybody near that gate had seen his face. Any assignment tied to that boarding area was compromised. That was the line that turned the stop into an operational failure, not just a legal one. And standing there on the airport floor, with passengers still whispering and cameras still up, Kerr finally understood that this was not ending with a simple release and a note in a report. It was about to get much bigger than him. Once the cuffs came off, the scene did not calm down. It just changed shape. Julian Cross was no longer being treated as a suspect. Now he was the federal officer who had just been exposed in front of a terminal full of travelers because a county deputy refused to verify first. That is a very different kind of problem, and everyone around that gate knew it. Sergeant Leah Barton tried to lock the scene down fast. She told the other deputies to stop talking to passengers, stop speculating, and stop making the situation worse. She directed airport staff to keep boarding paused. She asked the airline supervisor for a list of gate personnel who had been present. She wanted names, positions, and a timeline. She was already thinking ahead because once federal supervisors got there, every minute of this would matter. Cross did not raise his voice. He did not grandstand. He stayed direct. He told Barton the assignment was compromised. He said that was not a guess. It was a fact. His face had been recorded from multiple angles. Travelers near the gate had seen him handcuffed, searched, and then released after a federal confirmation call. Even if nobody around that gate knew exactly what his role was, they knew he was not an ordinary passenger. That was enough to destroy the purpose of an undercover aviation assignment. Deputy Mason Kerr still tried to justify himself. He said he had responded to an armed person report in an airport and followed the threat as he saw it. That was the line he kept going back to because it was the only part of his conduct that sounded defensible. The problem was that nobody serious was focusing on the first 30 seconds anymore. The issue was the next several minutes. That was where he lost control of the law, the protocol, and the common sense of the encounter. Cross answered him in a way that ended the debate. He said the problem was never the initial contact. The problem was that Kerr ignored federal identification, escalated in public, and kept going after the facts had changed. That was the line that people would later repeat, because it was clean and it was true. Then the federal side arrived. A supervisory federal air marshal, Nathan Velez, came onto the terminal floor with airport command personnel after being briefed through dispatch. He did not need a long explanation. He took one look at Cross, one look at the gate area, and one look at the county deputy standing there, and he understood what had happened. He asked Barton one question first. Had the air marshal's identity been publicly exposed before federal confirmation was complete? Barton answered yes. That answer carried weight. There was no soft way to put it, no procedural language to hide behind. A local deputy had publicly detained an undercover federal air marshal in a live terminal based on a false report and had kept doing it after receiving credentials. Velez then asked Cross whether he could still board. Cross said no. That was the operational end of it. The flight was no longer his mission. The moment was. Airport staff had to sort out the immediate mess. The airline needed to know whether the delay would continue. The Transportation Security Administration duty manager had to document the terminal disruption. Airport Command had to preserve radio logs, camera timestamps, and scene notes. Barton had to separate her deputy from the floor before he said anything else that made the department look worse. Kerr had gone from scene lead to liability in less than an hour. And this is where bad stops become career damage. Not at the moment of shouting, not at the moment of handcuffing, at the moment when every other professional in the room sees the same facts and understands that one officer kept pushing because he did not want to admit he was wrong. Kerr was pulled aside for an immediate debrief. He gave the same explanation again. Dispatch advised an armed, suspicious man. He responded with force. The credentials were not verified. He believed he had to maintain control. That explanation did not hold up under basic review. Barton asked whether Cross had threatened anyone. No. Whether he had displayed the firearm. No. Whether he had resisted commands after the stop began. No. Whether he had repeatedly requested verification through proper channels. Yes. Every answer made Kerr look worse. Cross gave his statement next. It was short, tight, professional. He explained where he had been positioned, how the initial commands were given, when he identified himself, when credentials were found, and how long the public detention continued after that point. He did not dramatize anything. He did not need to. A precise federal statement usually hits harder than an emotional one, because it gives everyone less room to argue. By then, the bystander videos were already moving. People from the gate had uploaded clips before the terminal was even fully cleared. The Bodycam footage was not public yet, but the passenger recordings were enough to light the fire. The first posts framed it as airport police arresting a federal officer. Others framed it as a deputy humiliating an undercover air marshal. Some people defended Kerr, at first because airports are high-risk environments, and no one wants officers ignoring gun calls. That defense weakened once more. Details came out. The public could accept caution. What they had trouble accepting was refusal to verify after valid credentials appeared. Within 48 hours, the county sheriff's office announced an internal investigation. That bought them almost no goodwill because the footage kept spreading and the facts kept getting worse. Local news picked it up first. Then national outlets followed because the story had everything that makes a case travel. Airport setting, federal agent, false report, body cam, public detention, interagency failure, civil rights exposure. That combination always moves. The county tried the usual first response. It called the incident unfortunate. It said the deputy acted on a report of an armed, suspicious person. It said the matter was under review. That language failed because people had already seen enough to know the real question was not why he approached. The real question was why he kept going after the federal identification. Then the lawsuit came. Cross filed a federal civil rights suit against the county, the sheriff's department, and Deputy Mason Kerr individually. The claims were exactly what you would expect. Unlawful detention, excessive force, public humiliation, operational compromise, reputational harm, failure to train, failure to supervise, federal mission interference. Once those claims were on paper, the county had a much bigger problem than a bad news cycle. And the lawsuit did not stay narrow. The complaint went after the system. It argued that the deputy's conduct exposed weak interagency training at a major airport, poor verification procedures for plainclothes federal officers, and a culture that let local officers treat every challenge as a test of authority. That is how civil cases really hurt departments. Not when they describe one bad moment, when they tie that moment to policy failure. Discovery made it worse. Internal training records showed deputies assigned to airport support had only limited practical instruction on handling contacts with undercover federal personnel. The procedures existed, but they were too general, too uneven, and too easy to ignore in a fast-moving scene. Kerr's own reports also hurt him. He had written the detention in a way that made him look more measured than the Bodycam later showed. That gap mattered. Once a report starts drifting away from the video, credibility drops hard. Cross's legal team also used the strongest part of the case, the timeline. Initial contact, federal identification, credentials found, public detention continues. Supervisor arrives, verification delayed, federal confirmation received, cuffs removed, cover destroyed. That sequence was clear. It was ugly. It was enough. The county settled before trial. The number was high enough to hurt, high enough that local officials could not brush it off as the cost of doing business. The settlement did not just cover the detention itself. It reflected the public exposure, the ruined assignment, the federal-local breakdown, and the policy failures that let the stop get that far. Kerr did not survive it professionally. He was suspended first, then terminated. State certification review followed. That review focused on judgment, report accuracy, escalation after identification, and failure to follow airport response protocol. The department tried to distance itself from him, but that only went so far. When a deputy creates this kind of failure in a major terminal, command owns part of it too. They put him there. They trained him, or failed to. Changes came after that. The airport adopted new joint contact rules for local officers, airport police, and federal aviation personnel. The 2026 update required immediate supervisor involvement, the moment a plainclothes subject credibly identified as federal law enforcement in a secured aviation environment. It also required a verification hold model, meaning officers had to shift from public domination tactics to controlled confirmation steps unless there was an actual active threat in front of them. That distinction mattered. Armed presence alone was no longer enough to justify blowing through identification in a terminal. Departments also added scenario-based training on friendly force risk, undercover exposure, and interagency contact inside airports. That training came too late for Kerr, but that is how reform usually works. Somebody gets humiliated, somebody sues, taxpayers pay, and only then do agencies decide they should have trained better from the start. As for Cross, he did what trained federal officers usually do after a scene like that. He documented everything, stayed disciplined, and moved forward. The detention did not define him. The deputy's bad call did. That is an important difference. And that is the lesson in this case. An officer can respond fast and still think clearly. An officer can take a gun call seriously and still verify before turning a terminal into a spectacle. What destroys cases like this is not caution. It is ego. It is the refusal to stop once new facts show up. It is the need to win the scene instead of handle it. So, what do you think? Was Deputy Mason Kerr being careful? Or did he turn a false report into a public abuse of authority the second he ignored federal credentials? Have you ever seen a situation where someone in uniform kept pushing just because they did not want to admit they were wrong? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to see how fast bad judgment can become a lawsuit. And subscribe for more stories like this.
You need to step out and explain that vehicle right now.
I already did. I'm part of the memorial program. The vehicle was cleared.
Parking restrictions still apply.
Then talk to event staff. They already handled it. Here, retired credentials.
I don't care who you are.
Hale.
Officer, you are making a mistake.
General Marcus Hale was a retired 3-star general. Officer Tyler Briggs was a rookie patrolman, who still thought every situation had to become a test of authority. This rookie patrolman just made the biggest mistake of his life. A retired three-star general was attending a memorial service for a fallen officer and veteran. The setting was solemn. Families were present. Active duty soldiers were in formation. Veterans stood in silence near the wreath line. Then Briggs stepped in, ignored the event protocol, ignored military credentials, and put handcuffs on the general in front of everyone. He thought he was enforcing order. What he was really doing was ending his own career on camera. And yes, it was all recorded. His body cam was running. Several people had phones out. Event staff had cameras too. There was no hiding what happened after that. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories about ego, power, and instant accountability, like this video and subscribe. This happened at a Veterans Memorial Cemetery just outside the city. Police were there for traffic control and access points. Military personnel were there for the ceremony. Families were there to honor the dead. Everybody had a role. That matters. Marcus Hale was not there as a guest in the crowd. He was part of the memorial program. He had been invited to place a wreath for a fallen brigade commander he had once served with. People on the military side knew exactly who he was. The event organizers knew too. His arrival had already been coordinated. Briggs was assigned to vehicle control near the main approach road. It should have been simple work. Keep lanes clear, help late arrivals, stay out of the ceremony, unless something serious happened. He didn't do that. He saw a black sedan parked near a restricted curb close to the ceremony route. That car had been cleared for official event movement. Briggs either didn't know that or decided it didn't matter. He focused on the vehicle and made up his mind before asking a single useful question. By that point, Hale had already stepped away from the sedan and moved into place for the wreath presentation. He was dressed formally, wearing retired insignia and ribbons. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Briggs walked straight toward the ceremony area and interrupted him. He told Hale to step out and explain the vehicle. He spoke like this was a routine enforcement stop. Wrong setting, wrong tone, wrong target. Hale stayed calm. He identified himself. He explained that he was part of the memorial service. He showed his retired military credentials. That should have ended it right there. It didn't. Briggs looked at the credentials and kept going. He said parking restrictions still applied. He said he didn't care who Hale was. Then he shifted from the car to Hale himself and started treating the situation like non-compliance. People nearby noticed fast. A military officer tried to explain that Hale was scheduled to participate in the ceremony. A cemetery staff member moved over and told Briggs the vehicle had already been cleared. A retired officer in the crowd tried to calm things down before the scene got worse. Briggs ignored all of them. That was the real problem. Not confusion, not lack of information. He was being given multiple chances to stop. He refused every one. Hale did not argue. He did not posture. He repeated the same basic facts. He was there for the service. His vehicle had been cleared. The memorial should continue without disruption. Briggs took that as resistance. He ordered Hale away from the wreath line. Hale stepped aside because he wasn't going to turn a memorial into a public fight. Briggs followed him and kept pressing. He demanded identification again, even though he had already been shown credentials. He started talking about interference with police duties. That's when younger officers nearby began to realize something was seriously off. One of them quietly radioed for a supervisor. Smart move. He could see this was going bad. Briggs kept escalating. He warned Hale that if he didn't comply immediately, he would be detained. Think about how absurd that was. A retired three-star general at a memorial service, surrounded by soldiers, veterans, and grieving families. The issue had already been explained. The rookie still pushed forward because he had locked himself into it. Hale remained composed. He told Briggs he was making a mistake. He made no threatening move. He gave no reason for force. He stayed controlled in a way that made Briggs look even worse. Then Briggs reached for the handcuffs. That was the moment the whole thing changed. People stopped seeing it as a tense misunderstanding. They saw exactly what it was: a rookie officer letting ego run the scene in the worst possible place. Briggs pulled the cuffs out and moved in like the decision had already been approved by someone above him. It hadn't. General Hale did not pull away. He did not raise his voice. He did not give Briggs any excuse to claim threat, resistance, or disorderly conduct. He kept his hands visible and stayed still. That detail mattered later because the body cam made it impossible for Briggs to invent a struggle that never happened. Briggs told him he was being detained for interference. That claim was weak on its face. Hale had not blocked him, touched him, threatened him, or disrupted police operations. The real issue was simpler. Briggs had given an order in public. The general had calmly explained why the order made no sense in context, and the rookie could not handle that. So he cuffed him. He put handcuffs on a retired 3-star general at a memorial service in front of active duty soldiers, veterans, police officers, cemetery staff, and grieving families. That single act turned a bad judgment call into a department-wide emergency. People reacted immediately. Several soldiers broke posture and looked toward the scene. One older veteran stepped forward before another attendee stopped him, probably because everybody understood that one more person entering the scene could make Briggs even worse. A woman near the front row pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Another person was already recording from the side walkway. A local reporter who had been covering the memorial lifted a camera toward the disturbance. Briggs had managed to create the exact kind of public humiliation that departments spend months trying to avoid. Hale still stayed controlled. He did not plead. He did not argue for the crowd. He stated the basic facts again. He was there as part of the ceremony. His vehicle had been cleared. The officer was making a serious mistake. He spoke like a man used to command, but without ego. That contrast made Briggs look even more reckless. Briggs responded by tightening his grip and walking Hale farther away from the wreath line. That made it worse. Now the memorial itself was visibly disrupted. Families turned in their seats. Soldiers on ceremonial duty were distracted. Event staff stopped watching the program and started watching the arrest. The entire point of police presence at an event like that is to protect order and dignity. Briggs did the opposite in under 2 minutes. A younger patrol officer near the lane control post got on the radio again, this time less quietly. He requested a supervisor to respond to the ceremony area immediately. His tone told the story. Something had gone very wrong. Briggs either didn't hear it or thought he could still push through. He started defending his decision out loud to the people around him. He treated every correction as interference. He treated every explanation as a challenge to his authority. That's the trap weak officers fall into. They stop enforcing actual rules and start defending their pride. A military captain moved towards the edge of the scene and identified Hale's role in the service. Briggs dismissed him too. A cemetery coordinator tried again to explain the access arrangement for the vehicle. Briggs cut him off. An older retired officer from the city's police department told Briggs he needed to slow down and think. Briggs ignored him as well. At that point, he wasn't managing a situation. He was fighting reality. Hale was then led several yards away from the ceremony path and positioned near a marked patrol unit. Briggs kept talking, kept justifying, kept acting like the problem was everyone else. Refusing to recognize his authority, Hale remained calm and compliant, which stripped Briggs of the usual excuses officers use after the fact. Then another thing hit Briggs, and it clearly hit him too late. 2 junior officers nearby had recognized the name Marcus Hale. One of them knew exactly who he was. Not vaguely, not maybe. He knew. He had seen the event sheet. He had seen the military guest list. He stepped closer, looked at Briggs, then at the handcuffed general, and realized this was now beyond embarrassing. This was a command level bad. He got on the radio and pushed harder for supervision. That call finally brought Sergeant Elena Ruiz. Ruiz had been handling perimeter issues near the main gate when the urgent request came through. She arrived fast, saw the crowd formation before she even reached the center path, and knew this was not normal event noise. Then she saw Hale in cuffs. That changed everything instantly. Ruiz knew who he was. She also knew what this would look like once the footage moved beyond that cemetery. A retired general, invited participant, memorial setting, public handcuffing, multiple witnesses. There was no soft landing left. She walked straight into the scene and demanded an explanation. Briggs started giving one. He said he had encountered non-compliance connected to a restricted vehicle. He said Hale had interfered with a police directive. He tried to frame the arrest as a straightforward enforcement action. Ruiz looked at Hale, looked at the cuffs, looked at the soldiers and families watching, and understood that Briggs had just handed Internal Affairs a gift-wrapped case. She asked one key question first. Had Hale threatened anyone or resisted physically? The answer was no. Everybody knew it. The Bodycam knew it too. Then she asked whether Briggs had been informed that Hale was part of the memorial program and that the vehicle had been event cleared. Again, yes, more than once. That was the break point. Briggs still tried to defend himself. He kept talking about consistency, rules, and not letting status affect enforcement. On paper, that sounds tough. In context, it was nonsense. Nobody had asked him to ignore the law for a powerful person. They had told him he was misreading the situation from the start. Ruiz then turned to Hale, addressed him properly, and told another officer to remove the cuffs. That was the moment Briggs lost control of the scene for good. Every person standing there understood what had just happened. The supervisor had not come in to support the rookie. She had come in, assessed it in seconds, and reversed him in public. And Briggs still didn't fully get it. Instead of shutting up, he started arguing with his own sergeant. He insisted he had lawful grounds. He said backing off would undermine police authority on scene. He was so deep in the mistake by then that he thought doubling down might save him. It did the opposite. Because the second he challenged Ruiz on that scene, in front of witnesses, he changed the problem from bad judgment to insubordination, wrapped inside a public misconduct incident. Hale's cuffs came off. Red marks were visible on his wrists. He rubbed them once, straightened his coat, and did not make a spectacle of it. He did not demand theatrics. He did not turn it into a speech. He just stood there with more discipline than the officer who had arrested him. That image stuck with everyone watching. Ruiz ordered Briggs to step back and say nothing else until command arrived. By then, command had already been notified. Not just police command either. Word had moved to the event liaison, then to department leadership, and almost at the same speed to the nearby military installation. Once names started crossing radios and phones, the scale of the mistake became obvious. This wasn't a messy local complaint that might sit in a file for weeks. This was happening live at a memorial, with a retired 3-star general and multiple agencies now aware of it. Briggs had wanted to prove he was in charge. Now he had the command staff, military brass, and soon Internal Affairs moving toward him, all because he couldn't admit early on that he had misread a parked car. That's how careers end fast, not always from one bad thought, from refusing every chance to stop. Captain Andrew Cole arrived less than 5 minutes later. By then, the ceremony had not fully recovered, the crowd was still watching, and Briggs was standing off to the side with the look of an officer who knew the ground had shifted under him but still hadn't accepted how bad it was. Cole took in the scene fast. General Hale had been uncuffed. Sergeant Ruiz was controlling the area. 2 junior officers were visibly uncomfortable, and several attendees were still recording. Cole had enough experience to understand what that meant. He did not need a long briefing to know this was already bigger than the cemetery. He went straight to Ruiz first. Smart move. He wanted the clean version before Briggs started trying to rewrite it. Ruiz gave it to him in order. Briggs had approached Hale over a vehicle position near the restricted curb. Hale had identified himself and explained he was a scheduled participant in the memorial. Multiple people, including military personnel and event staff, had confirmed the same thing. Briggs had ignored the explanations, treated the exchange as non-compliance, and handcuffed Hale for interference. No threat, no physical resistance, no public disorder caused by Hale, just escalation by the officer. That summary was enough. Cole then turned to Briggs and gave him one chance to explain himself. Briggs tried. He said he was enforcing a restricted area. He said he could not allow exceptions based on status. He said Hale had challenged his authority in front of a crowd and refused to follow direction. It was a terrible defense because it exposed the actual problem. He was still talking about authority as if the issue was personal disrespect instead of judgment, protocol, and restraint. Cole cut him off. He asked the question that mattered most. Had Briggs been informed that the vehicle was event cleared and that Hale was part of the memorial program? Briggs admitted that people had said that, yes. That answer killed the rest of his defense right there. Because once he admitted he had been told, more than once, what the actual situation was, this stopped being a misunderstanding. It became a conscious decision to ignore context, ignore corrections, and escalate anyway. Cole's face changed at that point. Not dramatic, just colder. He knew what this meant for the department. He also knew the footage would be brutal. He told Briggs to surrender his Bodycam unit at the end of the scene, remain silent unless directly questioned, and stay separated from the event. Then he told another officer to pull Briggs from active public contact immediately. That happened right there, in front of other officers, and Briggs still made it worse. Instead of staying quiet, he tried one more time to argue. He said backing him down in front of civilians would make the department look weak. He said officers had to stand by enforcement decisions once made. That line finished him. A seasoned supervisor hears that and understands the officer still hasn't learned the lesson. He's not showing regret. He's showing attachment to the ego that caused the problem. Cole shut that down on the spot and told him he was no longer part of the event operation. At the same time, another track was moving fast behind the scene. The chief had already been notified. Not through rumor, through command. The initial call up the chain was urgent because the names involved forced it to be urgent. A retired 3-star general had been handcuffed at a memorial by a rookie officer after being identified and vouched for on scene. There's no version of that report that sits quietly until Monday. The local base commander had also been informed. The military liaison attached to the event made sure of that. By then, police command was not just thinking about discipline. They were thinking about interagency damage, public trust, press response, and whether they had just insulted an entire military community in one of the worst settings possible. General Hales still handled it with more control than anyone had a right to expect. He did not grandstand. He did not demand special treatment. He answered Cole briefly, confirmed the sequence, and made clear that the ceremony should be allowed to continue with as little disruption as possible. That matters, because it stripped away any excuse that emotions had confused the scene. Hale stayed composed. The officer did not. Cole apologized directly to him, publicly, short and clear. He did not try to bury it in vague language. He acknowledged that what happened was unacceptable. That helped a little, not enough to undo it, but enough that everyone watching saw the department was no longer pretending the rookie had a case. Then came the practical problem. The memorial itself had to continue. Event staff moved fast. Soldiers reset formation. The wreath placement was reorganized. Families were guided back to the service. Ruiz and 2 other officers widened the perimeter so Briggs was out of sight. Cole stayed on scene because there was no way he was letting this spiral again. The ceremony resumed, but the damage had already been done. People in attendance were texting. Some were already uploading clips. A local reporter had enough footage to frame the whole incident before lunch. Several active duty members had names, times, and badge numbers written down. The department was not going to get a private version of the story. And then the real internal collapse started. Once Briggs was moved away from the crowd, Cole had him stand by near the vehicles and ask for a direct timeline. Briggs repeated the same logic again: restricted zone, refusal, interference, neutral enforcement. Every word made him look worse, because none of it addressed the central fact. He had been corrected repeatedly and ignored it. Cole asked whether Hale had threatened him, whether Hale had tried to leave, and whether Hale had physically interfered with an officer. All answers were no. Whether military personnel and event staff had explained the situation before the cuffs went on. Yes, there it was. A lot of officers sink themselves because they think if they keep sounding firm, the chain of command will respect the confidence. Real supervisors don't respect that. They hear immaturity, especially when the facts are this bad. Cole then made the call that effectively ended Briggs's day and probably his career. He told dispatch to mark Briggs out of service, pending administrative review, and requested an internal affairs response package be started immediately, not later, not after a cooling off period, immediately. That's rare for a reason. Departments usually buy time. They separate the officer, gather footage, issue a neutral statement, and move slowly. Cole skipped the usual delay because the incident had too many witnesses, too much documentation, too little ambiguity, and too much external pressure already building. He understood the department could not afford to look hesitant. Briggs finally started to understand the scale of it then. Not because of principle, because of consequences. He asked whether this was really necessary. He said nobody had been hurt. He said he was just doing his job. That line landed badly. He'd humiliated a retired general at a memorial and disrupted a service for the dead, and he was still framing it as routine enforcement under stress. Cole told him this was not routine, not defensible, and not staying in house as a quiet coaching matter. That's the point where rookie confidence usually breaks. Not when civilians object, not when bystanders record. When command looks them in the face and makes it clear the department will not carry the mistake for them. Briggs had started that morning thinking a restricted curb line was going to be his little test of authority. Now he was standing beside a patrol unit, pulled from duty, watched by his own supervisors, while command staff prepared an emergency review over an arrest that should never have happened. And the day still wasn't over. Because once the ceremony ended, the paperwork started. Then, the footage review. Then, the calls from downtown. Then the questions nobody in his chain could answer for him. That's when a bad scene turns into a short career. By that afternoon, the department had everything it needed. Bodycam footage, radio traffic, event notes, phone video from witnesses. The facts were clear. Briggs had been told who Hale was. He had been told the vehicle was cleared. He had been corrected more than once. He still put cuffs on him. That made the review move fast. The chief was briefed the same day. The city manager was notified. The base commander's office also got involved. This was no longer just a bad moment at a memorial. It was now a public failure with cameras, military leadership, and city leadership all watching. That evening, the department released a statement. They admitted a retired senior military officer had been improperly detained during the service. They called it a failure of judgment and professionalism. Internal affairs started immediately. Briggs gave the same defense again. Restricted vehicle, non-compliance, equal enforcement. It went nowhere. The issue was not Hale's rank. The issue was that Briggs ignored the facts in front of him and kept escalating. The video spread fast. Veterans groups were furious. The local community was furious. Even people who usually defended police had no patience for this one. The setting made it impossible to excuse. He had disrupted a memorial and humiliated a retired general in front of grieving families. Hale kept his response measured. The next morning, he gave a short statement. He said public service requires humility, judgment, and restraint. That line stayed with people because it summed up the whole thing better than any department press release. Less than 24 hours after the memorial, Briggs was fired. The department cited improper detention, failure to follow event protocol, disregard of supervisory correction, and damage to public trust. He turned in his badge, his weapon, and the rest of his equipment. His career ended almost as soon as it started. And that's the real point. This was not one split-second mistake. He had chances to stop. He had chances to listen. He had chances to correct himself. He ignored every one of them. After that, the department ordered retraining for ceremonial assignments, military coordination, and rookie supervision. They had to. A small issue had turned into a public disgrace because one officer cared more about winning than thinking. Hale's final message was simple. Authority means nothing without discipline. That was the lesson. Briggs thought backing down would make him look weak. Instead, refusing to back down cost him his badge, his job, and his future. Let me know what you would have done if you had seen that happen in person. And if you've ever watched someone in uniform let ego take over common sense, put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more.
Step aside.
You have my judicial credential.
Doesn't look right.
Then verify it.
Where'd you get this?
From the United States government. I'm Naomi Carter, federal district judge. You can confirm me with Chambers, the clerk's office, or the Marshal Service.
I'm handling it.
No, you're delaying a sitting judge from entering the courthouse.
Not coming.
This security officer thought he controlled the courthouse entrance. Then he decided a black federal judge's credentials had to be fake and turned a routine morning into a career-ending incident. He blocked her from entering her own building, ignored the ID in his hand, and kept pushing even after staff recognized her. The cameras were on. Witnesses were everywhere. And he was about to learn that ego doesn't outrank the federal bench. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about abuse of authority, body cam evidence, and people getting exposed in real time. Like the video and subscribe. The judge's name was Naomi Carter. She was a sitting federal district judge in her early 50s. Former prosecutor, former appellate lawyer, known for being direct, prepared, and hard to shake. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't need to be. That morning, she arrived just before first calendar. She had a briefcase, a robe bag, and a stack of notes for the hearings waiting upstairs. The lobby was busy. Lawyers were moving through screening. Clerks were coming in fast. Families were waiting near the benches. It was a normal federal courthouse morning. At the checkpoint stood Officer Brett Harlan. Courthouse security? Mid-30s? The kind of guy who had gotten too comfortable making snap judgments and calling it procedure. Judge Carter handed him her federal judicial credential. He looked at it, looked at her, then told her to step aside. She identified herself and told him he could verify her with Chambers, the clerk's office, or the deputy marshals. Easy fix. 30 seconds, maybe less. He didn't verify anything. He said the credential didn't look right. Then he asked where she got it. That question changed the whole tone. He wasn't checking a document. He was treating her like a suspect. Judge Carter stayed calm. She told him again who she was and said he was delaying a sitting federal judge from entering the courthouse. She asked him to call the Marshal's Service. He moved in front of the lane and blocked her path. That was the moment this stopped being a mistake. A few people nearby had already noticed. One attorney recognized her immediately. A clerk from inside the lobby looked over and froze. They knew exactly who she was. Harlan kept going anyway. She asked for his supervisor. He said he was handling it. Bad answer. That's what people say when they know someone above them would shut it down. A court employee named Evan Price, her courtroom clerk, stepped towards the checkpoint and identified her by name and title. He told Harlan she was expected upstairs and needed to get through. Harlan told him to stay back, said he wasn't taking anyone's word for it. Now he was ignoring the credential and staff confirmation at the same time. Judge Carter gave him another chance. She told him to contact the deputy marshals and clear it up properly. Instead, he looked at the badge again and said that anybody could wear a suit and carry a fake ID. That line landed hard. It was public. It was recorded. And it told everyone in the lobby what this really was. Not caution, not confusion. Bias mixed with authority. Judge Carter didn't argue with him. She switched gears. She asked for his name, his badge number, and whether his camera was recording. Then she stated, clearly and slowly, that she had presented valid judicial identification and was being denied entry without verification. She was no longer trying to convince him. She was building the record. Harlan still didn't back off. He reached for his radio. And that made the situation worse, not better. When Harlan called for assistance, he didn't say he was holding a federal judge with valid credentials. He framed it as a problem at the checkpoint. That's how bad officers buy time. They shape the story before anyone else gets there. Judge Carter caught it right away. She asked him what he had just reported. He ignored the question. By then, more people in the lobby were watching. A lawyer near the X-ray belt had stopped pretending to check his phone. A staff member near the elevators had already messaged upstairs. Evan Price stayed close enough to hear, far enough not to give Harlan an excuse to escalate. Judge Carter kept it simple. She said her name again, stated her title, said her hearings were about to begin, said he had refused to verify her identity through normal courthouse channels. Harlan asked for a second photo ID. She told him the judicial credential in his hand was the official ID for courthouse access. He then asked why she wasn't using a private entrance. That exposed another problem. He didn't even know the building routines well enough to fake confidence. Judges use different entry points depending on timing, security flow, and schedule. Staff in the lobby knew that. He clearly didn't. 2 more security officers arrived from inside. Harlan started talking first, fast. He described the credential as suspicious and said the woman at the checkpoint was refusing to cooperate. That version didn't hold up for long. One of the responding officers looked at Judge Carter, then at Evan Price, then back at Harlan. You could see the doubt immediately. The room already knew more than Harlan's report allowed. Judge Carter didn't waste words. She said she had shown official identification, asked for verification, and been blocked anyway. Then she asked Harlan one direct question. Was he claiming the court's own judicial credential was invalid? Or was he refusing to accept it based on his own judgment? He didn't answer directly. He said he was following his instincts. That told the whole story, not policy, not a system check. Instincts. Harlan then told her she would not enter the building until he was satisfied. That was the worst line yet. He had just turned courthouse access into a personal decision, not based on rules, based on him. The people around them heard it too. A few faces changed right there. This wasn't going to stay inside the lobby. Too many witnesses, too many court employees, too much recording. Judge Carter responded the way experienced judges do when someone hands them a clean record of misconduct. She stayed controlled. She asked him to repeat that statement. He refused. So she repeated it herself, out loud, so the camera in the room would catch it. Then she said he was interfering with court operations and delaying a sitting federal judge without lawful cause. That was the first moment Harlan looked uncertain. Not because he suddenly understood the law, because he realized other people were starting to understand what he had done. From the interior corridor, Deputy Marshal Lena Torres came into the lobby. She took one look at Judge Carter and knew exactly what she was seeing. She moved straight to the checkpoint and identified Judge Carter immediately. That should have ended it on the spot. Harlan tried to keep control anyway. He started explaining himself before Torres even asked a question. Another bad sign. Innocent people usually answer. They don't rush to build a defense before the facts are even requested. Torres asked one thing first. Had the judge presented her credential? Yes, that answer boxed him in. Because from there was nowhere to go. He had the ID. He had staff confirmation. He had a clear path to verify it, and he chose not to. Torres told him to step aside. He didn't move right away. And that hesitation in front of a deputy marshal, in front of courthouse staff, in front of witnesses, made everything much worse. Deputy Marshal Lena Torres didn't need a long explanation. She knew Judge Naomi Carter. She worked courthouse security details. She had seen her enter that building many times. Torres asked Harlan if the judge had already shown identification. He said yes. She asked if he had called Chambers, the clerk's office, or the marshal desk to confirm it. He said no, that was enough. Torres told him to move. Harlan started talking over her. He said the credential looked questionable. He said he was being careful. He said he had to trust his instincts. He kept reaching for the same excuse because he didn't have anything else. Torres shut that down fast. She told him this was a federal judge, this was an active courthouse entrance, and he had no basis to keep blocking her after refusing basic verification. Simple, direct, no room left. Judge Carter still didn't make a scene. She stood there, let the facts sit in the air, and watched him try to talk his way out of something the whole lobby had already seen. That was the point where Harlan made the mistake that finished him. Instead of stepping aside immediately, he questioned Torres in front of everyone. He asked how she could be sure. Bad move. Very bad move. Because now he wasn't just challenging Judge Carter. He was challenging a deputy marshal who actually knew the building, knew the credential system, and knew exactly how far he had already crossed the line. Torres answered him the way professionals do when patience is over. She said she was sure because this was Judge Carter, because the credential was valid, and because he had just admitted he never used any of the available ways to confirm it before blocking a sitting federal judge from entering the courthouse. That landed in the lobby like a hammer. At that point, Harlan finally stepped aside. Not because he understood what he'd done, because the room had turned. Too many witnesses, too many staff, too many people who could repeat the same sequence back word for word. His version was dead. Judge Carter didn't rush through the lane. She did something smarter. She paused and asked Torres to confirm on camera that her identification had been valid the entire time. Torres did exactly that. Then Judge Carter asked Evan Price, her clerk, to note the time and delay the calendar until further direction. That detail mattered. This wasn't just personal humiliation anymore. It had disrupted court operations. She then looked at Harlan and gave him one sentence. She said the danger starts when the person guarding the courthouse decides his judgment matters more than the law. That was it. No speech, no shouting, no theatrics, just a clean statement. And it hit harder because she didn't overplay it. Then she went through security and entered the building. The confrontation was over. The real damage was just starting. Within minutes, the story had moved upstairs. Clerks were talking, court staff were talking. Marshals were already pulling checkpoint logs. By the time Judge Carter reached Chambers, the chief deputy had been notified. The camera retention request was already being discussed, and the first written statements were being lined up from staff who saw the whole thing. That's how these cases turn. Fast. Once people realize there's a clean record, they stop treating it like a misunderstanding and start treating it like evidence. Harlan tried to protect himself almost immediately. He began explaining the situation to the other security officers before anyone formally questioned him. Another bad move. He was too eager. He kept repeating that he was following protocol, but the problem was obvious by then. Protocol would have required verification. He skipped that part, more than once. Worse, he had already said too much on camera. He had admitted he relied on instinct. He had admitted he didn't verify. He had admitted he still blocked entry after staff identification. That's not a paperwork issue. That's a judgment issue. And in a federal courthouse, judgment problems become employment problems very quickly. Later that morning, Judge Carter gave a short, factual account to the chief judge and the head of courthouse security. No embellishment, no anger, just the sequence. Credentials shown, identity stated, verification requested, staff confirmation ignored, entry blocked. Martial intervention required. That kind of statement is dangerous for the other side because it's clean. No exaggeration to attack. No emotion to discredit. Just facts backed by witnesses and video. By lunch, orders had gone out to preserve everything. lobby surveillance, radio traffic, body camera footage, access logs, incident reports, staff statements. Nothing was getting lost. Nothing was getting quietly rewritten. And Harlan had one more problem. His first verbal explanation to supervisors didn't match what witnesses were already saying. He implied the judge had been confrontational. Witnesses said she was calm. He implied the credentials seemed fake. The marshal said it was standard and immediately recognizable. He implied he was waiting on confirmation. The radio and lobby account showed he never actually requested the right confirmation in the first place. That's when the internal review stopped looking like routine discipline and started looking like a serious misconduct case. Because once the facts are fixed, the motive gets ugly fast. By the end of that day, Brett Harlan was off the entrance post. Not quietly either. Supervisors had already reviewed enough to know this was bigger than a bad interaction. Too many witnesses, too many staff statements, too much camera coverage, and his own words had done a lot of the damage for them. The body camera review was brutal. It showed Judge Naomi Carter presenting valid credentials right away. It showed her giving him normal ways to verify her identity. It showed him ignoring those options. It showed court staff recognizing her. It showed Deputy Marshal Lena Torres confirming her identity immediately. And worst of all for him, it showed that he kept blocking entry after all of that. That killed the confusion defense. Then they pulled the radio traffic. That made it worse. He had called for support without accurately describing the situation. He left out the judge's title, left out the credential, left out the staff confirmation. He framed it like a checkpoint problem instead of telling the truth. That told investigators he wasn't trying to solve the situation. He was trying to control it. Once the footage and radio logs were matched with witness statements, internal affairs moved fast. Harlan was placed on administrative leave first. Then his access to courthouse security systems was suspended. Then came the formal investigation. The question was no longer whether he made a mistake. The question was why he kept going after it was obvious he was wrong. That question got ugly for him fast. Several employees described the same pattern. He was respectful with some people, aggressive with others. More than one person said he had a habit of acting like certain professionals needed to prove they belonged in the building. The review widened. Old complaints came up. Not major headline cases, smaller ones. Dismissive conduct, selective screening, talking down to black attorneys and staff. Things that had been shrugged off before because nobody had forced the institution to look at them side by side. Now they were looking. Judge Carter did not turn it into a media show. She handled it the way judges handle serious misconduct, through record, process, and consequence. She filed a formal complaint through the court's administrative channel. She requested preservation of all footage. She documented the delay to court operations. And she made it clear that this was not about hurt feelings. It was about a courthouse officer deciding he could override law, policy, and official credentials based on his personal judgment. That framing mattered. Because once the issue became institutional, the court had to respond like an institution. The chief judge ordered a review of entry screening practices. The Marshal Service reviewed checkpoint procedures. Security leadership had to explain why a sitting judge could be blocked from entering after presenting valid identification and after being recognized by staff. Nobody had a good answer because there wasn't one. Then the civil side started moving. Attorneys representing Judge Carter sent notice of potential legal claims tied to unlawful detention, public humiliation, interference with official duties, and discriminatory treatment. The courthouse didn't wait for that to explode into a larger public fight. Settlement talks started early, quietly at first, then more seriously once the video had been fully assessed. At the same time, local legal circles already knew the story. Then local media got it. Then it spread wider. The basic facts were too clear to bury. Black federal judge blocked from her own courthouse. Valid credentials dismissed. Deputy marshal forced to intervene. Video preserved. Internal investigation opened. That kind of headline writes itself. Harlan's written report didn't help him. It hurt him. He described the judge as evasive. The footage showed she was clear. He suggested he was waiting on verification. The record showed he refused to use the obvious verification channels. He implied she escalated the scene. The witnesses said he did. Once that report was compared against the video, his credibility collapsed. And once credibility goes, careers usually go with it. A few weeks later, the outcome became official. He was terminated. The stated reasons were straightforward: failure to follow verification procedures, misuse of authority, false and misleading reporting, conduct inconsistent with courthouse security standards. The ugly part sat underneath all of it, even if the paperwork used cleaner language. He had looked at a black woman with federal judicial credentials and decided she didn't fit the role in his head. Then he used his post to act on that assumption. Judge Carter kept working. That's another part people miss in stories like this. The target still has to go back to the same building, same halls, same courtroom, same staff asking whether she's okay. Same place where she was publicly disrespected before work even started. She kept showing up anyway. But the building changed after that. Credential verification rules were tightened. Officers were required to use direct confirmation channels before blocking credentialed court personnel. Bias training was expanded. Escalation policies were rewritten. Supervisors were required to review checkpoint incidents involving court officials the same day. And staff understood something clearly now. The cameras were not just there for defendants and the public. They were there for the people with badges too. That's the part that mattered most. This wasn't a story about one awkward morning at security. It was a story about what happens when a person with a little authority thinks instinct is more important than law. That mindset doesn't just insult people. It disrupts institutions. It damages trust. It turns routine contact into abuse. Harlan thought he was the final word at the entrance. He wasn't. The record was. The witnesses were. The footage was. And once all of that came together, his badge couldn't protect him from the truth he had already put on camera himself. So that's the story. A courthouse officer tried to decide who looked like a federal judge, and that decision ended his career. What would have gone through your mind if you were standing in that lobby watching it happen? Have you ever seen somebody with a little authority push too far because they thought nobody would check them? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this.